Okay, differences between the House and the Senate. We're in the Congress chapter, and one of the things that you'll note is the Congress obviously is a bicameral institution. Bi meaning two, cameral meaning houses. And the gist of it is, and when you go back and you look, there was the Virginia plan that the framers had been dealing with. The Virginia plan was based on population, and this would ultimately become the House of Representatives in the overall Constitution. The New Jersey plan was based upon equality, and this would eventually become the United States Senate. For this video, what I wanted to do was really to hit on a couple of basic differences between the House and the Senate and try and give you a few things to think about. Because believe it or not, the House and the Senate don't have the exact same rules. They don't have the exact same qualifications. And some would argue that's a check. Some would argue that's a positive. Some would argue that this could be a little bit problematic. But I'll let you decide on that. When you look at the United States House, the constitutional requirements are very simple. Number one, you have got to be a minimum of 25 years old. In order to become a House member, you've got to be a minimum of 25 years old. So let me just go ahead and put this up here. For the House, you've got to be 25 years old minimum to get in. The second thing is, in order to become a House member, is you must have lived in the United States for a minimum of 7 years. A minimum of 7 years. So the idea here, and let me stress this, you do not have to be born in the United States. You can have been born anywhere. Quite frankly, you could move to the United States as 25. If you, from Brazil, say for instance. If you move from Brazil, indeed, you came here at 25, you lived here for 8 years to the point where you're 33, you can now run for the United States House. If you moved here at 18 and stayed here 7 years and turned 25, you could indeed run then. But the gist of it is, minimum of 25, minimum 7 years living here, and it's got to be 7 continuous years, but understand, you don't have to be born here. Third thing for the House, you've got to have a 2-year term. Now understand on this, every 2 years, the entire House of Representatives is going to be up for election/re-election. Let me repeat that. Every 2 years, the entire United States House is going to be up for election or re-election, depending upon how you want to term it. Now, with this in mind, there are 435 House members. So every 2 years, in theory, you could vote out every single one of those rascals if you are not particularly pleased with what it is that they're doing. Now, let's go over to the Senate. Senate's going to be a little bit different. In the United States Senate, you've got to be a minimum of 30 years old. In the United States Senate, you've got to be a minimum of 30 years old. You must have lived in the United States for a minimum of 9 years. A minimum of 9 years. And indeed, when you look at it, instead of a 2-year term that the House has, you in the United States Senate are going to have a 6-year term. Now remember, the entire House is up for re-election every 2 years. So when you think back to it, 2008 was the year that President Obama was elected. The entire House was up for election. They were subject to election that year. In 2010, obviously President Obama was not subject to any election, but the entire House was subject to election again in 2010. And then when you put it into the context of 2012, certainly President Obama is going to run for, well, I shouldn't say that. Certainly there's going to be a presidential election in 2012, maybe Obama, maybe not, but indeed the entire House is going to be subject to election for the 3rd time in that 6-year period. Understand, with the United States Senate, it's a little bit different. For the United States Senate, every 2 years, it's going to be 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3 of the senators that are going to be subject to election. So 1/3 of the senators were up for election in 2008. 1/3 of the senators are going to be were up for election in 2012, and 1/3 of these senators are going to be up for election in 2010. Bottom line is, it's going to take 6 years for the entire Senate to have been elected or re-elected, been subject to election, I guess is the best way of saying it. Whereas in a 6-year period, the House members are going to have been subject to election 3 separate times. One of the reasons that the founders did this is that they wanted the House members to be very, very responsive to the will of the people. I mean, let's think about this. In the beginning of the Constitution, the House was the only body that was popularly elected. Not the President and not the United States Senate. They wanted them to be representative of what it was that the people wanted. Now the problem with this is, people can be stupid sometimes. They can be emotional sometimes. They can be radical sometimes. And the sense was we needed to have a check on this people rule, if you will, mob rule, maybe even you might say. So they divided up the Senate 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. And when you think about it, you could conceivably win a majority of the House in one election cycle. The Republicans just did that in 2010. The Democrats had previously done that, I believe, in 2006. But it's going to take several election cycles in order to be able to gain a majority of the Senate. So when you think about it, the Democrats got a majority of the House in 2006. They won Senate seats in 2006, but it took 2008 for them to have a majority of the House and the Senate. Now in 2010, the Democrats really got nailed. They lost the majority in the House. They also lost Senate seats. But because only 1/3 of the senators were up for election, at that point they didn't get enough to be able to take it. So when you think about it, the House is representative of the people very, very strongly. The Senate is almost a check on the responsiveness to the people because you need 2 election cycles generally to be able to get a majority there. And when you think about it, people's minds will change over the course of 4 years a lot more than they will over the course of 2, which means it's difficult even in 2 sessions or 2 elections to get a majority of both the House and the Senate. Now, as far as functions go, the House. The number one function that the House has, or the number one advantage that being a House member has, is that you have the ability, all revenue bills must originate in the House of Representatives. All revenue bills must originate in the House of Representatives. Now understand, the Senate is still going to be able to consider the bills, they're still going to be able to make amendments and whatnot, but it's going to be the House that's going to be able to set the terms of the debate. And when you think about it, think about going to a fight. Do you want to be the person that throws the first punch, or do you want to wait around and see what happens? The House basically has the ability with revenue bills to throw that first punch by putting their language and their priorities into revenue or any bills that are dealing with money. And when you set the terms of the debate, sometimes that's a big advantage. The Senate has got some other advantages as well. The Senate is basically going to be the one that's going to be dealing with appointments. The president can nominate people for the cabinet. The president can nominate various diplomatic folks. The president can indeed nominate judiciary members. But it takes the United States Senate, with advice and consent of the United States Senate, for these people, these appointments, to actually gain office. A president could be very much in favor of candidate X, or Justice Y, or Diplomat Z. But if the president does not have a majority of the Senate, then these folks are not going to be given the office. Now think about it like this. The House has no role whatsoever in the appointment process. This is only with the advice and consent of the Senate. The Senate is also going to be the one that deals with foreign treaties. So when you think about foreign treaties, anytime the president is going to negotiate a treaty, maybe ending a war or maybe dealing with trade, the House doesn't have a say. It's going to be the Senate that's the one that does this. This is an important power for the United States Senate to have. Think back to Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was president of the United States when World War I ended. Woodrow Wilson was president of the United States until 1920. World War I ended in 1918. And Woodrow Wilson went around and put together an international organization to prevent future wars. He put together a peace treaty that didn't overly punish Germany and a number of the other countries that were involved in World War I. And basically he was overruled by his European allies, but more importantly, he was overruled by the United States Senate. The United States never signed the Treaty of Versailles, even though Woodrow Wilson had screaming crowds all over of Europe in a positive way, and he was immensely popular in the United States. The United States Senate said, no, we are not going to commit American troops. We are not going to commit American troops to foreign conflicts. And as such, they voted it down. And even to this day, and we're getting close to 100 years later, the United States has not ratified this Treaty of Versailles because the Senate dug its heels in. Now, one last thing to consider, or maybe two. One of them is the impeachment power, and I'm sure you've heard about this. If somebody is impeached, there have been 2 presidents in American history who have been impeached. Any idea who they were? Well, one was Andrew Johnson, and the second one was not Richard Nixon, but rather it was Bill Clinton. Andrew Johnson in the aftermath of the Civil War, Bill Clinton for actually lying under oath, and I won't get into many details with that here. The House is actually the one that impeaches an elected official. And by impeaches, I'm not saying that they remove anybody, but what I'm saying is that you are officially charged with a crime. Think about your own lives. Have you ever been charged with speeding? Have you ever, in fact, been charged with murder or maybe something worse? I don't know. Maybe something in between speeding and murder. The gist of it is that just because you're charged, that does not mean you're guilty. It just means that you're being accused. The House is the body that impeaches. And when you go back and you look at President Clinton, a majority of the United States House charged him, which meant that indeed a majority impeached him, meaning he was charged with crimes such as lying under oath. It is actually the United States Senate that is the body that tries the impeachment, meaning they are going to declare your innocence and guilt. And while you only need a simple majority in order to be impeached or charged with a crime, in the United States Senate you need a significant majority of the senators in order to find you guilty. The irony is that with President Clinton, a majority of the United States Senate thought he was guilty. They thought he was guilty. But they didn't have the significant majority, which means that President Clinton was A, not convicted, and B, he was not removed from office. The one last thing that I wanted to give you today, understand, and I did mention this before, the Senate is going to have 100 members. The House, if you recall, has 435. So when you think about this, size in this regard is going to matter, because since the Senate has a smaller membership, then indeed they are going to have more flexibility with their rules. And in the United States Senate, there is something that is known as a filibuster. The idea behind the filibuster is you, if you get control of the podium, can talk as long as you want. And it does not have to be germane to the subject. In the South, decades ago, a lot of Southern senators, and in fact a number of Southerners, period, quite frankly, were against civil rights legislation. They were against the idea of treating white and black citizens the same way before the law. So what did they do? As the Congress began to initiate civil rights acts in the 1960s, they actually got up on the floor and they filibustered. Again, when you get up on the floor, when you have the podium, you can talk as long as you can. Think about your own lives. Think about the first telephone conversation that you have with that guy or that girl that you're interested in. How long did you talk on the phone? How long were you, sitting around talking about nothing, basically? How long is your longest phone conversation in your life? Well, for filibuster purposes, Strom Thurmond got up in front of the United States Senate and he filibustered for over 24 consecutive hours. Now think about this. He got up there and talked. For a while he talked about the bill. Then he went into other things. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. He read from the Bible. Milk, bread, eggs, alcohol. He read his grocery list. Adams, Abigail, 555-1212. Adams, Brian, 555-1213. Adams, Chuck, 555-1214. Strom Thurmond read from the phone book. He read the Bible. He read the phone book. He read his grocery list. He talked about the bill. Bottom line is, when you get up there and you have the podium, no other Senate business can get done. So the longer that you talk, especially when people are ready to go home, the more that they're going to begin to want to compromise. Believe it or not, though, he got up there and spoke over 24 hours. The bill passed over his filibuster without amendment, which means that ultimately he lost. On the House side, a little different. On the House side, they have structured rules. What you can talk about, how long you can talk about, who can actually be the people that talk. Because if you didn't and you've got over 4 times as many members, well, by golly, you're not going to get anything done. In the Senate, you can filibuster, and this can actually hold up all sorts of legislation, which means the minority can actually sometimes rule the Senate. These are just a few differences between the House and the United States Senate.